The Upanishads. Penguin Classics audiobook.
Valerie J. Roebuck was born in Hertfordshire in 1950. She studied at the University of Cambridge, where she was awarded a BA in Oriental Studies, specializing in Sanskrit and other Indian languages, and a PhD for a thesis on South Indian bronzes. A freelance scholar and lecturer, she is an honorary research fellow of the University of Manchester. Dr. Roebuck has a broad interest in Indian language, culture, and religion. She is a Buddhist, practicing and teaching meditation in the Samatha tradition, and is involved in interfaith work in Manchester. Her previous publications include The Circle of Stars, An Introduction to Indian Astrology, Element Books, 1992.
The Introduction.
The Upanishads are among the world's most influential creative works. Not only did they play a large part in shaping Hinduism as it is today, but the debates that they helped to initiate also influenced, either directly or by reaction, the development of the other South Asian religious traditions, including Buddhism. In the last 2 centuries, they have also begun to influence religious and philosophical thought outside Asian cultural areas. So, it is probably no exaggeration to say that at least half the people in the world have been affected in some way by the ideas of the Upanishads. The word Upanishad, however we derive it, implies an esoteric teaching, concerned not with the outward forms of religion but with the inner meaning. Typically, an Upanishad recounts one or more sessions of teaching, often setting each within the story of how it came to be taught. A renowned spiritual teacher is about to leave the household life to live as a renunciant in the forest. One of his wives refuses her share of his wealth and asks for knowledge instead. A serious young boy, taking his angry father at his word, goes to the house of death. While there, he takes the opportunity to question the god about the afterlife. A king sends his chamberlain to look for a great teacher of whom he has heard. He finds a rude and uncouth man, sitting scratching himself under a cart. The knowledge that is sought in these encounters is aimed not at material success or even intellectual satisfaction, but at enabling the questioner to become free of worldly suffering and limitations, to attain fearlessness, to cross beyond sorrow, to dig up the supreme treasure. There are several hundred works that have the status of Upanishads for at least some groups of Hindus. Many of these are late texts, expounding specialized ways of practice, such as yoga or tantra, or teaching devotion to one great god or goddess. In fact, the most famous Hindu text of all, the Bhagavad Gita, is a devotional Upanishad of this kind, embedded within the great epic of the Mahabharata. It even keeps the traditional format, with the divine charioteer Krishna as the teacher, and the warrior prince Arjuna as the seeker for knowledge. It follows that any selection of Upanishads like the present one must be to some extent arbitrary. However, there are 13 texts, often called the principal Upanishads, which would be recognized by almost all Hindus as forming the foundation of their philosophy, and it is these which are translated in this book. 11 are those on which the great philosopher Sankara wrote commentaries in the 8th to 9th century CE, confirming their canonical status for later generations. In addition to these, there are several others to which Sankara made reference, though he did not write commentaries on them. One of these is the Kasitaki, which is now universally accepted among the principal group. Its worldview and language seem very close to those of the early Upanishads, particularly the Chandogya and the Brihadaranyaka. The Maitri or Maitrayani is sometimes included among the principal Upanishads and sometimes not. Patrick Olivel's recent translation, Olival 1996, omits it. As we have it, it seems to be somewhat later than the other Upanishads in this collection. However, it contains a wealth of material of significance for anyone interested in the development of Hinduism or of meditation, and I felt its inclusion here was necessary. Along with the Mandukya, it helps to show some of the directions in which the Upanishadic tradition was taken in later times. While the Mandukya lays stress on knowledge, the Maitri is principally concerned with practice. Both give great importance to the symbolism of the syllable Om.
The background.
The Upanishads form part of the tradition of religious literature that is known as the Veda, literally knowledge. This tradition begins with the 4 Saritas or collections, themselves more frequently known as the Vedas, the Arja Veda, Yajur Veda, Samaveda, and Atharva Veda. Each sarita is a collection of metrical prayers and hymns for use in sacred ritual, associated with a particular class of priests who specialized in it and handed it down within their families. Of the four, the Yajur Veda is probably the earliest. It consists of hymns for use in the elaborate sacrifice, yajna, which was at the heart of Vedic religion. The Yajur Veda consists of ritual formula, yajus, to be uttered during the activities of the sacrifice, while the Samaveda consists of hymns, saman, arranged for chanting. Both the Yajur Veda and the Samaveda share a large part of their content with the Yajur Veda, adapted for the different purposes of the priests who used them. The Rig Veda is performed in the main as simple syllabic chant, on a narrow range of tones which follow the accents marked in its text. The Yajur Veda follows a similar system, though the tones used for each accent are not the same as those for the Yajur Veda. But the Samaveda is sung in an elaborately ornamented style, in which one syllable may be extended and sung over a number of notes. The Atharva Veda stands a little apart from the other three. The early Upanishads generally group the Arji, Yajur, and Samavedas together, and treat the Atharva Veda as something slightly separate. Subsequently, the Atharva Veda comes to be regarded as a fourth Veda, on a level with the other three. Its verses, called Atharva Veda, like the priests who used them, often resemble magical spells, used to cast out misfortunes, gain success in love, and so on. They are generally concerned with the triumphs and problems of the individual, rather than with public sacrifices. But the distinction is by no means always a sharp one. The three earlier Vedas contain personal as well as public, material, and the Atharva Veda contains many hymns that would not be out of place in the other saritas. The basis of Vedic religion was the sacrifice, which no doubt began as a way of nourishing and placating the gods, but expanded to become something of huge symbolic complexity, even to being seen as a means of keeping the cosmos in existence. The sacrificial enclosure and the altar within it, like the temple in later Hinduism, were interpreted as a kind of mandala, or diagram of the universe. Each part of it, every action performed within it, and all the equipment and offerings took on multiple layers of significance, of which the skilled priest was expected to be aware as he carried out his duties. In ancient times, at least, the sacrifice involved the ritual slaughter of animals. Modern revivals, like that documented by Fritz Stahl, use symbolic replacements. The supreme examples of the sacrifice were elaborate rituals sponsored by kings, such as the horse sacrifice. It is perhaps debatable how often such costly and time-consuming rituals were carried out in full. However, their structure served as the pattern on which less ambitious kinds of ritual were based. Once the ritual had taken on this complex symbolic power, a new kind of literature was required to provide instruction in it. This was the role of the Brahmanas, liturgical commentaries on the sacrifice for use by the priests, which formed the second stratum of the Vedic literature. The next stage was that of the Aranyakas, which overlap to some extent with the Brahmanas, but are concerned with the inner symbolism of the rituals rather than their external forms. Often they take one of the rituals of the sacrifice and turn it into a form of inner contemplation. The Vedas, Brahmanas, and Aranyakas, together with the principal Upanishads, are regarded by Hindus as Shruti, that which is heard, revelation, as distinct from Smriti, that which is remembered, epics, legends, law books, etc. Each sarita has come down to us in various lineages, sakas, branches, each of which may have its own associated Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads. The Yajur Veda exists in two recensions, the black, Krishna, and white, Sukla versions, each with its own sakas. In the black tradition, the verses of the sarita are interspersed with the Brahmana material, while in the white they are kept separate. The diagram overleaf shows the lineages of the Upanishads, which are translated in this book. In some cases, the Upanishads have a genuine and early connection with the Vedas to which they are attached. For example, the Brihadaranyaka is closely related to the Satapatha Brahmana of the Yajur Veda, and is itself, as its name implies, regarded as an Aranyaka as well as an Upanishad. The first chapter of Book 1 of this Upanishad, internalizing the symbolism of the horse sacrifice, Book 2 of the Chandogya, for example, is devoted to the symbolism of different elements of the chant. But in the case of the later Upanishads, the attributions to particular Vedas seem to spring mainly from a desire to fit them into the pattern. In general, when there was no clear reason to attach them to another Sarada, they seem to have been allotted to the Atharva Veda 0.14. In certain respects, the Upanishads mark the changing point between the religion of the Vedas, now generally called Brahmanism, and Hinduism as it later developed. Although Hindus regard the whole Vedic literature as the foundation of their tradition, in practice, the Brahmanas and Aranyakas, and even most of the hymns of the Sarita, are now the province of specialists. But the Upanishads are still loved, studied, and treated as guides to life by Hindus today, more perhaps than any text apart from the Bhagavad Gita. In certain respects, the Upanishads anticipate developments that remain important to the present day. They include what are thought to be the earliest mentions of religious practices, such as bhakti, devotional worship, philosophical schools, such as Sankhya and Vedanta, and even deities, such as the goddess Uma and a teacher called Kursana, son of Devaki. In other respects, they look back to an older way of life, reflecting a society that is more socially fluid than that described in later texts, such as the law books. According to the formulations of classical Hinduism, knowledge of the Vedic literature was restricted to men of the upper three classes, Varnas, who had become twice born by undergoing initiation with the sacred thread. But in the Upanishads, we meet women who can debate Shruti as equals with men. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Yajnavalkya's wife Maitri is called a scholar of sacred lore, and her interest is treated as entirely admirable. In the Great Debate of Brihadaranyaka, Book 3, Gargi Vakaknavi disputes on equal terms with the male scholars. Not only does she regard herself as the equal of anyone there except Yajnavalkya himself, but the other Brahmanas seem to take her at her own estimation. In view of what subsequently happens to Vidagdha Sakalya, I do not think we can take Yajnavalkya's warning about asking too many questions as being patronizing.
Lineages of the principal Upanishads.
We also find men of doubtful social background giving or receiving teaching. A good example is the story of Satyakama Jabala in Chandogya 4. Later commentators have great difficulty with this story, and sometimes go to considerable lengths to explain away the clear meaning that Satyakama's parents either were not married or at most had some very informal contract. Yet such explanations seem to take away from the impact of the story, with its clear message about the overriding importance of truthfulness. One of the most striking developments in the Upanishads is in the attitude to family life and the renunciation of it. The Vedas take for granted the overwhelming importance of the desire, even the duty, of a man to marry and leave sons to carry on his family traditions. In the early Upanishads, too, this theme is strongly represented. In the Brihadaranyaka, for example, we find many passages that are concerned with the traditional obligation for a man to leave a son behind him, and the sexual rituals thought to ensure that this would happen. But there are other passages, particularly those concerned with the teaching of the sage Yajnavalkya, where we find approval of the urge to renounce such worldly needs, desiring it, Brahman, the supreme reality, as their world, renouncers wander. Knowing it, the ancients did not desire offspring, for they thought, what is offspring to us, when the self is our world? Leaving behind desires for sons, desires for wealth, and desires for worlds, they lived on alms. For desire for sons is desire for wealth, and desire for wealth is desire for worlds. Both are merely desires. Such teachings are associated with shramanas, ascetics who wandered from place to place in search of truth, studying with a teacher, or challenging rivals to debate. Shramanas, like Indian sadhus today, seem to have followed a variety of practices, some wearing distinctive robes or animal skins, others going naked, some with shaven heads, others with long matted locks. Both Buddhism and Jainism originated in Shramana circles, as did a number of other movements that have not survived to the present, such as that of the Ajivikas. These movements all rejected the authority of the Vedas, one of the reasons why they are regarded as religions in their own right, and not as branches of Hinduism, though their influence also fed back into Hinduism as it developed, particularly in such matters as the increasing emphasis on nonviolence, ahimsa, and the rejection of animal sacrifice. But there were others among the Shramanas who continued to accept the authority of the Vedas, while interpreting them in new ways. Their influence can be strongly seen in the Upanishads, and in the subsequent development of Hinduism. Sramanas did not have to come from the Brahmana class, and might bring with them ideas that came from outside the Brahmanical tradition. It has often been noted that both the Buddha and Mahavira, the founder Jainism, were born in the Kshatriya, not the Brahmana, Varna, and that their followers came from every level of society. But we see similar tendencies in the Upanishads. In Brihadaranyaka and Chandogya, Kshatriya, Pravahana Javali claims knowledge about the human destiny after death that has not previously been known to Brahmanas. The tension between the urge to live in society and carry on one's family, and the urge to renounce worldly life in a wholehearted search for liberation has remained a live and creative one for Hindus to the present day. Often, a solution was sought by assigning different priorities to different times of life. It was recommended that a man should first marry and father a family, and that only after fulfilling these duties should he abandon the household life and live as a renunciant. This solution was eventually formalized into the system of 4 asramas, or stages of life. The asramas, in their fullest form, were offered as the ideal plan for the life of a Brahmana man, though there were comparable structures for men of the other twice-born classes. According to this system, when he was old enough to go to a teacher's house, a boy was expected to become a celibate student, Brahmacharin. At the end of his studies, he was expected to marry and become a householder, Grasta. When his children had grown up and had children of their own, he should leave the household life and become a forest-dwelling ascetic, Vaniprastha. At the end of his life, he should give up all worldly things to become a homeless renunciant, Sannyasin. Sometimes the 4 asramas were associated with the 4 parts of Shruti. It was said that the Brahmacharin should study one or more of the Saritas, the Grihastha, the Brahmanas, the Vaniprastha, the Aranyakas, and the Sannyasin, the Upanishads. In the Upanishads themselves, although there are clear references to different stages of life, there is no explicit statement of the asrama system in its classical form. It is arguable how far the asrama scheme was ever actually practiced. Certainly there seems no evidence that any of the groups of sacred texts were restricted to one particular asrama. In fact, it was early recognized that not all the details of it were practicable in the present age of the world, and there seem always to have been a number of men, and even a few women, who left conventions behind and became ascetics at any time of life. It should not be forgotten, either, that there were great scholars and teachers who contemplated higher realities while living the household life. They included royal sages such as Janaka and Ajatasattu, and Brahmana sages who achieved renown and wealth as sacrificing priests. The triumphs of Yajnavalkya, described in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, all take place while he is living in a family with his 2 wives and winning wealth and cattle that would have made him a millionaire in modern terms. He is clearly believed to have achieved liberation while in the household state. In many cases, however, we are told next to nothing about the background of the characters. We simply do not know, for example, whether Gargi Vakaknavi was a Sramani or a married woman. The trend in recent research on the Upanishads has been to rediscover their connection with the earlier parts of Vedic literature. This is important, but it should not lead us to minimize their originality. The world they describe is not the pastoral society of the Vedic hymns, but a city-based culture deriving its wealth from industries such as weaving, pottery, and mining, as well as from agriculture. The sages may be based in the forest, but they mingle with kings and princes, and although most people still have the perennial human concerns that we find in the Saritas, with creating a prosperous life for themselves and their families, others now question the satisfaction to be found in the whole realm of existence and renounce the household life entirely. It is clearly the same world that we find in the early texts of the Buddhists and Jains.
Dating the Upanishads.
The date of the Upanishads is still a matter of debate. For many traditional Hindus, the question is irrelevant, since in essence, at least, the whole of Shruti literature is considered to be aparaya, not of human origin, and of primordial antiquity, containing truths to be rediscovered in every age of the world. But the view among most scholars is that the Saritas of the Veda date back to about 1500-1000 BCE, the Brahmanas and Aranyakas to 1000 BCE on, and the Upanishads from about 700 BCE on. Attempts to set the whole body of literature further back always come up against the fact that the period of the early Upanishads clearly cannot be too far removed from that of the Buddha and of Mahavira. both of whom were traditionally placed in the 6th century BC. It seems probable, at least, that the main teachings of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, attributed to the sage Yajnavalkya, are immediately pre-Buddhist. Parts of the rest are, if anything, older. Yajnavalkya presents the doctrine of reincarnation as a new and unfamiliar one, whereas in the earliest Buddhist texts that we have, it is already fully developed. There is little internal evidence to link the Upanishads to historical events that are known from elsewhere. The most that we can say with confidence is that the material culture described in the earlier Upanishads appears entirely compatible with what the archaeological evidence tells us of the city-based culture of the 6th and 5th centuries BCE. It is possible to place the Upanishads in a rough sequence among themselves. The Brihadaranyaka, Chandogya, Taittiriya, and Aitareya Upanishads are generally agreed to be the earliest. All have strong links with the earlier Vedic material and are mainly in prose with verse passages. The Kausitaki Upanishad follows a similar format, though its versions of the material that it shares with the Brihadaranyaka and Chandogya give the impression of being later reworkings. The Kena, Katha, Svetasvatara, and Mudaka seem to belong together. The last three are almost entirely in verse, the Kena in a mixture of verse and prose. All seem to anticipate later developments in Hindu philosophy, including yoga, Sankhya, and bhakti. The Isavasya is generally thought to belong here, though its clear link with verse passages of the Brihadaranyaka suggests an earlier date. The Prasna and Mandukya revert to the prose format of the early Upanishads, but contain ideas that clearly have later origins, particularly in their interpretation of the sacred syllable Om. The Maitri is a different case again. It seems to contain material from different periods, including a core that is related to the Taittiriya, but the main body of it appears much later, and includes references to astronomical ideas that were probably not current until the 2nd century CE. So we are brought back to the consensus view that the principal Upanishads were composed from about 700 BCE, perhaps incorporating some older material. The early prose Upanishads could well date from about 700-400 BCE, the verse Upanishads 2 or 3 centuries later, and the Prasna and Mandukya from the end of the last millennium BCE. The Maitri could have been put into its present form as late as the 2nd or 3rd century CE. Such is my own view about the dating of the Upanishads. I hope that those who take a different view will not let it deter them from reading my translation with an open mind. After all, the date of a text is not the most important thing about it, though it may help to provide a context for what we are reading. Surely much that is most important about the Upanishads is timeless, perhaps what was originally meant by calling them aparusya and attributing them to a primordial past.
Authorship and transmission.
The authorship of the principal Upanishads is as enigmatic as their date. According to tradition, they were transmitted by the sages who act as teachers in the texts. Yajnavalkya in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Uddalaka Aruni and others in the Chandogya. Svetasvatara in the Upanishad that bears his name. The most detailed account is in the lineage chapters of the Brihadaranyaka, which trace the teaching back from one Patimasya or Patimasiputra via some 50 generations of human and divine students and teachers to its ultimate source, either Aditya, the sun god, or the supreme reality itself. Yajnavalkya himself appears in one of these lists, but these lists seems to refer to the content of the texts, the truths believed to be embodied in them, rather than the words in which the texts are expressed. It is clear from the Upanishad itself that Yajnavalkya gave his teachings in his own words, to suit the circumstances and the people questioning him, and it seems reasonable to assume that the other teachers in the lineage did the same. So the tradition seems to have nothing to say about the actual form in which these teachings were handed on, or who assembled them into the literary form in which we have them today. The early Upanishads, at least, bear clear signs of having been created and originally transmitted as part of the oral tradition. We do not know at what stage they were put into writing. At the other extreme, the Maitri, with its remarkable complexity of structure, must surely have been assembled in a written form, albeit one that was strongly influenced by the conventions of the oral form. We know something of the ways in which ancient Indian texts were memorized and preserved from accidental corruption. In the case of the Vedic hymns themselves, There was an elaborate process of memorization. The effectiveness of this system can be seen in the fact that the Vedas have survived in an ancient form of Sanskrit, generally known as Vedic, with words and grammatical forms that had dropped out of the spoken language even before the time of the Upanishads. The learning system must have helped to ensure that these features were not smoothed over and replaced by more familiar forms. The method of learning the early Buddhist texts seems to have been a less formal one. Monks who knew the texts would meet and chant them together to make sure that mistakes had not crept in. Perhaps some similar process was involved in the transmission of the early Upanishads. The stress on memorization seems to be universal in the South Asian traditions. Even today, when teachings of all kinds are readily available in print, many Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain teachers can draw upon extensive internal libraries of memorized texts, and hearing is still viewed as a more effective way of learning about spiritual matters than reading.
Key concepts.
The Upanishads often teach through riddles, images, and suggestions, rarely through statements of dogma. However, certain important concepts recur throughout.
The Brahman.
Brahman was in origin one of a group of words and names which clustered around the idea of priestly power and its central manifestation, sacred speech. It could mean sacred lore as a whole, or some particular powerful saying. It could be priesthood, either the priestly class as a whole or the power embodied in it, counterpart to Kshatriya, royalty, the power of the ruling class. In the Upanishads, all these meanings are still present, but the word has developed to mean the sacred power not just of some particular person, word, or class, but of the whole universe, hence the first cause, absolute or supreme reality. There is an overlap in the different meanings, and sometimes we can only guess which was uppermost in the author's mind. The scholars of Brahman, Brahmavadan, of Svetasvatara are certainly expert in the sacred lore, but they also seek the reality or first cause behind it. Brahman is a neuter word and indicates an abstract concept. The masculine form from the same stem is Brahma, referring to a male being who embodies the quality of Brahman in its various senses. In later Hinduism, the neuter and masculine forms of the word are clearly differentiated and attached to two distinct concepts. Brahman now refers exclusively to the abstract power, and Brahma to a creator god with his own attributes and characteristics. In the Upanishads, the distinction is much less sharp. In the chapters on creation in Brihadaranyaka first, the creator figure seems to shift between the neuter power and the masculine deity. In the Kina, the neuter Brahman takes an active part in the narrative, appearing before the gods as a mysterious being, Yaksa. Sometimes we cannot be sure which of the two is meant. The words differ in only a few of their grammatical forms, and in compounds they are indistinguishable. Does Brahmaloka mean the world of the god Brahma, or the world or state achieved by a person who realizes Brahman? In Book 1 of the Kausataki, the two appear to be the same. Where there is real ambiguity, I have tried to indicate it. I have normally left the word Brahman untranslated and saved any comment on usage for the notes. When a translation seems to be required, I have added the original word in brackets.
The Atman.
Another complex term is Atman, a word whose origin is disputed. Some consider that it was originally a term for the breath, which would make it a parallel to prana, below. In everyday usage, it was the reflexive pronoun myself, yourself, themselves, etc. In the Upanishads, it becomes the subject of speculation. What is the self? Who, in reality, am I? It comes to be seen as a real, unchanging part within each changing being, just as Brahman is within the changing universe. The existence of such an unchanging part was among the main points of contention between early Hinduism and Buddhism. In the translation, Atman appears both as the self and as myself, oneself, etc. Where it seemed appropriate, I have added the Sanskrit word in brackets.
The Purusa.
By the time of the later Upanishads included in this book, Brahman and Atman have become the accepted way of discussing the nature of reality. However, in the earlier period, the sages seem still to be experimenting with different ways of talking about it. In the early Upanishads, the inner part of a human being is often called Purusa, man or person, rather than Atman. I generally use person to avoid the implication that it is exclusive to the male. For the authors of the Upanishads, every being contained both male and female aspects. Here, the inner reality is pictured in almost physical form as a tiny being moving inside the body, a dwarf, a thumb in length, like a rice grain or a barley corn, yet mysteriously as large as space. Some of the texts envisage a series of purusas, or atmans, of increasingly subtle form, from the physical body to the inmost self. The concept of purusa is first found in a famous hymn of the Yajur Veda, in which a giant man with 1,000 heads, 1,000 eyes. Who is all this? Whatever has been and whatever is to be, is sacrificed by the gods, and his dismembered body used to create the world. As so often in the development of the Vedic tradition, what was originally a cosmic concept then became internalized through inner contemplation.
The prana.
Prana means breath, that which gives life to every being. Within the body, it is said to divide itself into 5 separate breaths, each also called prana. The 5 pranas all have names derived from the verb an, to breathe, with different prefixes denoting direction of movement. Unfortunately for the translator, ideas about their functions changed over time. In later Hindu physiology, the functions of the breaths are clearly defined. The first is prana itself, literally breathing forth, as the process of breathing in and out. It is based in the chest and has its seat in the heart. Apana, breathing away, is the lower breath, based in the intestine, thought to be responsible for the process of digestion and the elimination of waste matter from the body. Vyana, breathing apart, breathing in different directions, is the diffused breath, thought to pervade the whole body. Una, breathing up, is the up breath, based in the throat, and samana, breathing together, is the central breath based in the navel. This system seems to anticipate the later theory of the chakras, in which energy flows are thought to be centered on particular points within the body. In the Prasna Upanishad, the pranas are clearly described in the above terms. In the Aitareya too, the prana and apana seem to have their later roles, but in the earliest references the situation is more complicated. Chandogya first. Makes sense only if we assume that vyana means between breath, the point at which the breath stops in mid-respiration, and prana and apana are the out-breath and in-breath, or vice versa. Elsewhere in the Brahmanyaka, there are traces of yet another system with references to the breath of the mouth and the middle breath. Because the translations of these words are somewhat speculative, I have generally added the original terms in brackets. Apart from these technical uses, the word prana can also be used of the senses, of the bodily functions in general, and even of living beings seen as embodying the pranas. The central importance of the breath in its various forms is repeatedly stressed, notably in the fable found in several Upanishads of the competition for supremacy between the human faculties, in which only the breath proves itself indispensable.
The cosmos.
For the authors of the Upanishads, the inner and outer worlds are closely interrelated. Human nature and the nature of the universe are seen as microcosm and macrocosm. Often we encounter a list of correspondences, taken from the earlier Brahmana literature, in which the sun corresponds to the eye, the moon to the mind, wind to the breath, fire to speech, and so on. Typically, both the cosmic powers and the faculties within the human being are called devas, or God. Therefore, accounts of the creation of the universe as we know it, sarvamidam, all this, are intimately connected with ideas about the nature of the human being. There is generally an attempt to describe the way in which an original, pure, undifferentiated state of being came to fall into the diverse and less pure state in which we see ourselves and the universe to be today. This attempt, in turn, is the key to finding a way to return to the original, purer state. There are traces of an ancient debate between those who saw the original state as being and those who saw it as not being. These debates use some of the terminology of the speculative passages in the Veda, such as the Purusa hymn and the creation hymn. However, they unite it with a new preoccupation with finding a way to achieve liberation from a world which is now seen as a cycle of otherwise unending bondage. The force that causes the fall from the original state is identified with desire in some form or another. hunger for food, or desire for a companion. The Upanishads do not in general envisage the creation of something from nothing. The language used is that of emanation, begetting or giving birth, or the ordering of a chaotic original material. In the early Upanishads, the being responsible for this is described in a number of ways: as death or hunger, as Brahma/Brahman, as Hiranyagarbha, the golden embryo, and as Prajapati, lord of offspring, whose children include gods, demons, and human beings. In the middle Upanishads, we find the growth of a more developed kind of theism. In the Keta, the supreme deity is variously identified with Agni, the Vedic fire god, Datra, the arranger, and Aditi, the mother of the gods. In the Svetara, Rudra, identified with the solar deity Savitra, already has many of the titles and attributes of Shiva. Particularly in Book 3, the deity becomes the focus of personal worship and devotion, tinged with awe and a touch of fear, rather as Krishna does in the great vision of Book 11 of the Bhagavad Gita.
The Upanishads as literature.
Many of the distinctive features of the Upanishads as literature are connected with their origins in an oral tradition. The literary devices that are used seem to be chosen primarily as means of conveying teaching. Perhaps the most striking of these devices is repetition, which takes several forms. There are a number of passages that are found in different versions in more than one Upanishad. Such, for example, are the passages on the triumph of the breath and on the 2 ways by which a person can go after death. Since each of the Upanishads was in origin a separate work, this is not so much repetition as a case of different authors drawing on the same fund of oral material and interpreting it in their own ways. Sometimes the same kind of repetition occurs within an Upanishad, as with the 2 different versions of the dialogue of Yajnavalkya and Maitri in the Braharanyaka. It is possible that both were originally separate versions of the same teaching, each handed down through a slightly different chain of teachers. However, the authors of the Upanishad, as we have it, must have felt that both versions were distinct enough to include, and indeed each contains, material that is not in the other, though the second version is slightly fuller and more detailed than the first. More typically, there is a deliberate use of repetition within an Upanishad for dramatic or teaching purposes. For example, in Braharanyaka 2, the sage Gargya attempts to teach Ajatasattu, but finds the king more than a match for him in debate. Gargya puts forward 12 different forms in which he visualizes Brahman, each time using the same form of words. I worship as Brahman, the person who is in the sun, and so on through a series of 12 persons or Purusas. Ajatasattu rejects each of these visualizations, not as wrong, since each is said to bring great benefits to the one who practices it, but as being inadequate as a way of understanding Brahman. Do not talk to me about him. I worship him as the topmost, the head and king of all beings. Whoever worships him as such becomes the topmost, the head and king of all beings. The word translated here as worship is upas, and these visualizations are often called upayasana, an untranslatable word combining the ideas of meditation, worship, and contemplation, 0.49. Often the seeker is advised to contemplate something as a symbol or embodiment of something else. As in the first words of the Chandogya Upanishad, one should contemplate the syllable Om as the Udgita. Upasana is often used as a way of moving from grosser to subtler concepts of truth. Gargya is unable to do this, and in the end has to ask Ajatasattu to teach him instead. Sometimes the repetition seems designed to act like the recitation of a mantra, putting the hearer in the right frame of mind for understanding to arise, as in Yajnavalkya's answer to Uddalaka Aruni's question about the nature of the inner controller. That which resting in the earth is other than the earth, which the earth does not know, of which the earth is the body, which controls the earth from within. This is yourself, the inner controller, the immortal. That which, resting in the waters, is other than the waters, which the waters do not know, of which the waters are the body, which controls the waters from within. This is yourself, the inner controller, the immortal. And so on for 20 verses, through the rest of the cosmic powers, through beings as a whole, and through the faculties of the individual being, in relation to deities, adhidaivatam, in relation to beings, adibhutam, and in relation to oneself, adipami. as these different levels are called in the Upanishads. Finally, Yajnavalkya brings it all together. It is the unseen seer, the unheard hearer, the unthought of thinker, the unknown knower. Other than this, there is no seer. Other than this, there is no hearer. Other than this, there is no thinker. Other than this, there is no knower. This is yourself, the inner controller, the immortal. What is other than this is suffering. These words are themselves picked up again in his next answer to Gargi, so helping to bind the different chapters of Book 3 together. For their intended effect, such passages have to be read in full, preferably aloud. The favored means of conveying teaching in the Upanishads is dialogue, which takes a variety of forms. Sometimes the situation is the expected one, with a seeker humbly asking a sage for instruction, but at other times there is an element of challenge or competition, as rival sages seek to test themselves against one another. Sometimes, as with Ajatasattu and Gargya, a less regarded person may prove more knowledgeable than a teacher who is reputed to be wise. This way of teaching belongs to a tradition of verbal combat that is first found in the Brahmanas. The sage who wished to excel in it needed not only a profound knowledge of ritual and its meaning, but also powerful debating skills and the ability to ask and answer questions in new and unexpected ways. Riddle and paradox are essential to this style of teaching, partly as ways of opening the hearer's mind to unfamiliar concepts, and partly for sheer delight, for the gods seem to love the mysterious and hate the obvious. In the Upanishads, the riddle was particularly apt as a way of suggesting ideas about Brahman and Atman which could not readily be conveyed in conventional terms. The one, for whom priesthood and royalty both are the rice, and death is the sauce. Who, truly, knows where he is? Two birds, companions and friends, cling to the same tree. One of them eats the sweet pipala berry, the other looks on, without eating. An important part of the sage's debating skills was wordplay, often in the form of puns or punning etymologies. The authors were almost certainly aware of the true derivations of these words, but regarded verbal resemblances as something more than coincidence. For them, it appears, the sound of a word had a genuine relationship to the thing it named. Throughout the texts of the Upanishads, we see the delight of the authors in the resources of the Sanskrit language, with its huge vocabulary, its versatility, and its wide range of consonants, which make possible striking effects of assonance and alliteration. His complexity of detail exists in tension with a powerful simplicity and directness. Stories are told with little scene setting or explanation, and the characters appear with the minimum of introduction, leaving us to judge them by their own words and actions. The prose is generally clear and unadorned, drawing on universal experiences, as a caterpillar reaching the end of a blade of grass and taking the next step draws itself together. So the self, dropping the body, letting go of ignorance and taking the next step, draws itself together. As a weaver, unpicking a pattern from her weaving, fashions another, newer and more beautiful shape, so the self, dropping the body and letting go of ignorance, creates another, newer and more beautiful shape.
Isavasia or Is, Upanishad.
Pervaded by the Lord, OM, that is full, this is full. Fullness comes forth from fullness. When fullness is taken from fullness, fullness remains. OM, peace, peace, peace. All this, everything that moves in this moving world, must be pervaded by the Lord. Enjoy what has been abandoned. Do not covet anyone's wealth. You must seek to live 100 years. Just doing work, Carmen, here. There is no other way for you but this. This way, work does not stick to a man. Those worlds, covered with blind darkness, are sunless by name. Those people who are self-slayers go to them on departing. One, unmoving, swifter than mind, the gods cannot catch it as it goes before. Standing still, it outruns others that are running. Materisvan sets the waters in it. It moves, it does not move. It is far and near likewise. It is inside all this, it is outside all this. Whoever sees all beings in the self, and the self in all beings, does not shrink away from it. For the one who knows, in whom all beings have become self, how can there be delusion or grief when he sees oneness? He has encompassed the bright, 11 the bodiless, the unwounded, the sinewless, the pure, the unpierced by evil. The wise seer, conqueror, self-born, he has arranged objects according to their nature, through eternal years. They who worship ignorance enter blind darkness. They who delight in knowledge enter darkness as it were yet deeper. It is different, they say, from knowledge. It is different, they say, from ignorance. So we have heard from those wise ones who have revealed it to us. Whoever knows knowledge and ignorance, both of them, together, by ignorance crosses over death, and by knowledge reaches immortality. They who worship non-becoming enter blind darkness. They who delight in becoming enter darkness as it were yet deeper. It is different, they say, from becoming. It is different, they say, from non-becoming. So we have heard from those wise ones who have revealed it to us. Whoever knows becoming and destruction, both of them, together, by destruction crosses over death, and by becoming reaches immortality. The face of truth is concealed by a vessel made of gold. Reveal it, Pusan, to my sight, which has truth as its dharma. Pusan, Ekarsi, Yama, Surya, son of Prajapati, draw apart your rays and draw them together. I see the light that is your most beautiful form, that very person, I am he, my breath, to immortal air. This body has ended in ashes. Oh, will, remember the deed. Will, remember the deed. Agni, God who knows all ways, lead us by a good road to prosperity. Overcome our crooked faults, and we will render you the utmost reverence. Om, that is full, this is full. Fullness comes forth from fullness. When fullness is taken from fullness, fullness remains. Om, peace, peace, peace.
Brihadaranyaka Upanishad.
The great forest teaching Om. That is full. This is full. Fullness comes forth from fullness. When fullness is taken from fullness, fullness remains. Om, peace, peace.
Book 1. Chapter 1.
1. Dawn is the head of the sacrificial horse. The sun is the eye of the sacrificial horse. The wind his breath. The fire that is in all men his open mouth. The year his body, Atman. The sky is his back. Middle air his belly. Earth his flanks. The directions his two sides. The intermediate directions his ribs. The seasons his limbs. The months and half-months his joints. The days and nights his feet. The constellations his bones. The clouds his flesh. The food in his stomach is the sands. The rivers are his bowels, liver and lungs. The mountains, plants, and trees are his hairs. The rising sun is his front half. The setting sun his rear half. When he yawns it lightens. When he shakes himself it thunders. When he urinates it rains. Speech is his voice. 2 die arose as the sacrificial vessel ate in front of the horse. Its birthplace was in the Eastern Ocean. Night arose as the sacrificial vessel behind him. Its birthplace was in the Western Ocean. These two came into being as the vessels at either end of the horse. Becoming steed, he carried the gods. Becoming charger, he carried the Gandharvas. Becoming courser, he carried the demons. Becoming horse, he carried human beings. The ocean was his kinsman, the ocean his birthplace.
Chapter 2.
1. In the beginning there was nothing here. This 11 was covered by death, by hunger, for hunger is death. Death made up his mind, if only I could have a self. Shining, he moved about, and as he shone, the waters were born of him. As I shone, water came to me, he thought. That is why water is called Arche 0.16. Water will come to the one who knows in this way why water is called Archa. 2. The waters are Archa. The foam of the waters was compacted together. It became the earth. He toiled on it, and as he toiled and grew hot, his brightness, his essence, became fire. 3. He divided himself into 3, 1/3 being the sun and 1/3 the air. As breath too, he was divided into 3. The eastern direction became his head. That one and that one became his forequarters. That one and that one became his hindquarters. The southern and northern directions became his two sides. The sky his back, middle air his belly, this his breast. He stands firm on the waters. Knowing this, one stands firm wherever one goes. 4. He desired that a second self might be born of him. By means of mind, hunger, that is death, joined with speech in sexual union. The seed became the year. Before that there was no year. He carried it for so much time. After so much time, a year, he sent it out. He opened his jaws to eat his offspring. It made the noise ban. That became speech. 5. He realized that if he were to kill it, he would make less food for himself. With that speech, that self, he sent out all this. Whatever there is, the Yajur Veda, Yajur Veda, and Sama Veda, the matters, people, and animals. Whatever he sent forth, he began to eat. Because he eats everything, space is called Aditi. Whoever knows that this is why space is called Aditi becomes the eater of all this. All this becomes his food. 6. He desired that he might sacrifice again with a greater sacrifice. He toiled, he raised heat, and as he toiled and grew hot, his splendor, his vigor, departed. The breaths are splendor, vigor. Once the breaths had departed, his body began to swell, but mind was still in his body. 7. He desired that that body of his should become fit for sacrifice, and that by it he should become embodied. Then his body became a horse. Since it has swollen, he thought, it has become fit for sacrifice. That is why the horse sacrifice is the Asvamedha. Whoever knows this knows the horse sacrifice. Letting it go free, he contemplated it. After a year, he sacrificed it to himself. He offered the animals 31 to the deities. That is why folk offer the horse, which is consecrated to all the deities, as an offering to Prajapati. The one who gives heat is the horse sacrifice. The year is his self. Fire is Arka. The worlds are his bodies. They are two, the shining one and the horse sacrifice. Then again, they are just one deity, death. He who knows this conquers re-death. 35 death does not get him. Death becomes one of the deities.
Chapter 3.
1. The descendants of Prajapati are of two kinds, the gods and the demons. The gods are the younger, the demons the elder, and they vied for these worlds. The gods said, "Come, let us defeat the demons at the sacrifice by means of the Udgita." 2. The gods said to speech, "Chant the Udgita for us." "I will," said speech, and chanted it for them. Whatever enjoyment there is in speech, it sang into being for the gods. But the fact that it sang well was for itself. The demons thought, by means of this Udgita, they will defeat us, and attacking it, pierced it with evil. That evil is the evil that anyone does when he says what is not proper. 3. The gods said to breath, "Prana, chant the Udgita for us." "I will," said breath, and chanted it for them. Whatever enjoyment there is in breath, it sang into being for the gods. But the fact that it smelled well was for itself. The demons thought, by means of this Udgita, they will defeat us, and attacking it, pierced it with evil. That evil is the evil that anyone does when he smells what is not proper. 4. The gods said to the eye, "Chant the Udgita for us." "I will," said the eye, and chanted it for them. Whatever enjoyment there is in the eye, it sang into being for the gods. But the fact that it saw well was for itself. The demons thought, by means of this Udgita, they will defeat us, and attacking it, pierced it with evil. That evil is the evil that anyone does when he sees what is not proper. 5. The gods said to the ear, "Chant the Udgita for us." "I will," said the ear, and chanted it for them. Whatever enjoyment there is in the ear, it sang into being for the gods, but the fact that it heard well was for itself. The demons thought, by means of this Udgita, they will defeat us, and, attacking it, pierced it with evil. That evil is the evil that anyone does when he hears what is not proper. 6. The gods said to mind, "Chant the Udgita for us." "I will," said mind, and chanted it for them. Whatever enjoyment there is in mind, it sang into being for the gods, but the fact that it imagined well was for itself. The demons thought, by means of this Udgita they will defeat us, and attacking it, pierced it with evil. That evil is the evil that anyone does when he imagines what is not proper. In the same way they afflicted the other deities with evil, they pierced them with evil. 7. The gods said to the breath in the mouth, Ayasya Prana, "Chant the Udgita for us." "I will," said the breath in the mouth, and chanted it for them. The demons thought, by means of this Udgita they will defeat us, and, attacking it, desired to pierce it with evil. As a turf would be scattered if it struck a rock, they perished, scattered in all directions. Then the gods prevailed, and the demons were overcome. Whoever knows this himself prevails, and the adversary 40 who hates him is overcome. 8, they said, where is the one we had dealings with just now? He is here in the mouth. He is Ayasya Angirasa, the essence, rasa, of the limbs, anga. 9. That deity is called Dur, for death is far from him. Death is far from the one who knows this. 10. That deity, having driven away evil, that is, death, from these deities, took it to the end of the directions. There he set down their evils. So one should not go to the people there, one should not go to the end of the directions, lest one should meet with evil, with death. 11. That deity, having driven away evil, that is, death, from these deities, then carried them beyond death. 12. First, he carried speech across. When speech escaped death, it became fire. Fire, having passed beyond death, blazes. 13. Next, he carried breath across. When breath escaped death, it became wind. Wind, having passed beyond death, purifies. 14. Next, he carried the eye across. When the eye escaped death, it became the sun. The sun, having passed beyond death, gives heat. 15. Next, he carried the ear across. When the ear escaped death, it became the directions. The directions have passed beyond death. 16. Next, he carried the mind across. When the mind escaped death, it became the moon. The moon, having passed beyond death, shines. Whoever knows this, these deities carry him beyond death. 17. Next, he sang into being good food for himself. Whatever food is eaten by him, and he is supported on it. 18. The gods said, you have sung all this into being as food for yourself. Give us a share in this food. Then sit round me. We will, they said, and surrounded him. So whatever food one eats by means of him, the gods too enjoy. Whoever knows this is surrounded by his own people. He becomes the Lord, the best, the foremost of his own people, an eater of food, an overlord. If someone knows this, and one among his own people desires to rival him, that rival is not even adequate to support his own dependence. But if someone who helps him desires to support his own dependence, that helper is adequate to support his own dependence. 19. He is called Ayasya Angirasa, for he is the essence of the limbs. Breath is the essence of the limbs. Breath is the essence of the limbs. So when breath departs from any limb, it dries up, for it is the essence of the limbs. 20. It is also Braspati. Speech is Brati, and it is its lord, Pati, so it is also Braspati. 21. It is also Brahmanaspati. Speech is Brahman, and it is its lord, so it is also Brahmanaspati. 22. It is also the Saman. Speech is the Saman. It is she, Saaman. It is equal to a gnat, equal to a fly, equal to an elephant, equal to the three worlds, equal to all this, so it is the Saman. Whoever knows the Saman in this way attains union with the Saman, shares a world with it. 23. It is also the Udgitha. The breath is Ud. For all this is upheld by breath. Speech is song. Ud and Githa make Udgitha. 24. On this, Brahmadatta Kaikitaneya, while drinking the king, said, may the king make this man's head split apart, if Ayasya Angirasa chanted the Udgitha by anything else but this. He chanted it only by speech and by breath. 25. Whoever knows the property of the Saman obtains property. Its property is tone. So, one who is about to fulfill the office of priest should wish for good tone in his speech. With speech possessing good tone, he can fulfill the office of a priest. So at a sacrifice, people desire to see a priest with good tone, and one who therefore has property. Whoever knows as such the wealth of the Saman obtains property. 26. Whoever knows the gold, Suvarna, of the Saman obtains gold. Its gold is tone. Whoever knows as such the gold of the Saman obtains gold. 27. Whoever knows the support, of the saman stands firm, pratistha. Its support is speech. The breath sings when it is supported on speech. Some say supported on food. 28. Now there is the praying of the prayers of purification. The prostra chants the saman. While he chants, one should mutter these prayers. From the unreal lead me to the real. From darkness lead me to light. From death lead me to immortality. When he says, from the unreal lead me to the real, death is the unreal, immortality is the real, he means, from death lead me to immortality, make me immortal. From darkness lead me to light. Death is darkness, immortality is light. He means, from death lead me to immortality, make me immortal. From death lead me to immortality. There is nothing here that seems obscure. In whatever other hymns of praise there are, one should sing into being, good food for oneself. In them one may choose a boon for whatever desire one may desire. The Udgatra who knows this sings into being, either for himself or for the patron of the sacrifice, whatever desire he desires. So it is called world-conquering, and whoever knows the saman as such has no prospect of ever being without a world.